tonight.
You're all so kind and patient. So tonight's event, Art and Activism Now, is being brought to us by Erin Falker-Obichigha. She is a practicing visual artist.
Shut up.
Oh, I'm very sorry.
That's my aunt.
Thank you for the correction, Auntie. She is a practicing visual artist and accomplished curator and arts administrator. She is the curator at the Carr Center out of Detroit, Michigan. After receiving her undergraduate degrees from Stanford University in art history and art practice, she went on to receive her MFA from the Sam Fox School at Washington University in St. Louis and MA in art history from Wayne State University. She has curated several highly regarded exhibitions in the city of Detroit and has worked on projects such as 30 Americans, Say It Loud, Art, History, Rebellion, OU Fancy, and Beyond Space, a compendium and exhibition curated by Carrie Mae Weems. Please please join me in welcoming Erin, a speaker who needs no introduction, to speak about art and activism. Welcome, everyone. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I am Erin. I'm so pleased to be here. And so just a few housekeeping rules. I am very much a timid on stage person. So if you want to say something, go ahead, unmute yourself and ask a question, interrupt, whatever you got to do. I prefer interaction because then it's not just me on my soapbox, because I can get really excited about stuff and just go off and nobody knows what I'm talking about. I'm off in la la land. So interaction is preferred. So if you want to show yourself on the video, that'd be great. That way I can see who I'm talking to, but otherwise we'll just go from there. So good evening. I am Erin Falker-Obichigha, and I guess I'll start by telling you maybe some fun facts about me that are a little more interesting than what's in my bio. I am a working professional. I'm a wife. I have a 5-month-old baby girl. And I told myself when I was very young that I would marry someone with an accent from a faraway land. And so lo and behold, years later, my husband is from Nigeria and he says potato. So, and like most of you out there, I am working from home. My co-workers are Delilah and Maddox is sleeping back there on the floor. And they are 2 pit bulls, and they are always at lunch or on a break or something like that. They don't ever do any work. So let me share my screen and we'll get into business. All right, where are we at here? Okay. All right. Okay, so give me a thumbs up if you can see that. Awesome. Okay. So tonight we are hopefully going to talk about something that I find very interesting and hopefully other people do as well. We're going to talk a little bit about art and activism. And so as an art historian and an artist, I'm always interested in these questions.
That's Erin talking.
How does art and experience open our eyes to the possibility of a better and fairer and kind of a more just world? So how does art work? And so as an African-American woman, I know that, firsthand that museums are problematic. Working in museums, working in galleries, there is a lot of stuff going on that is interesting to say the least. And right now things are especially tense. So in 2020, after the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and other people, there's been kind of renewed scrutiny about American institutions, and museums have not escaped that kind of look, deep look into what's going on. So museums have been asked to kind of take immediate action and decisive steps to kind of right some of the wrongs that are, going on in the institution. And that includes both for the artists that are on display, but also the people that are behind the scenes, the curators, the people that work there. So these institutions, at times seem, there's a call for an overhaul, essentially, of museum culture. And this culture that sometimes ignores demands for equity and inclusion and can be actively discriminatory. So let me get into this. So our goals for tonight, and what are the takeaways? So we are going to examine what catalyzes protest. We are going to deconstruct methodologies used by art activists and examine how these methodologies can be used for activism now. Okay, so moving on, if I can, oh, there we go. So some of the key questions that we'll be thinking about. Why do some African Americans feel like the museums do not reflect them? How does the inability to see oneself reflected by an institution lead to criticism through protest and artwork? So keep that in the back of your mind. And as I said before, if you have any questions, you want me to stop and kind of go back, or you have anything you want to say or comment, please feel free to unmute yourself and just let it out. Otherwise, if you could stay on mute, that way there's not the interference and people get the experience. Okay, so let's start. Let's kind of dive right in. So we're going to look at some things that are pretty complicated, but sort of sensible. So as I was preparing for tonight, I was like kind of having a freak out because I didn't know how I could explain Hegel's recognition theory. So it's kind of complicated, but it makes a lot of sense to me at least. And then I remembered that there's such a thing as YouTube, and it is a magic place. So if you don't remember anything about what's about to come out, which is a lot of philosophy, just remember the notion and the object are dependent concepts. So the notion is what we are to ourselves. So what we think about ourselves, what Erin thinks about Erin, and the object, what others think about me, they're related. So we are actualized by social recognition. So if you don't remember anything, please remember that, and we will get into some other people talking because I am tired. So this is Charles Taylor, and he's going to talk a little bit about, just kind of give you a brief overview of what we're thinking about here.
I think everybody recognizes in some way, sees in some way that we need other people to be who we are, that our identity needs to be worked out with other people. But I think that the notion of recognition focuses on something very important here, in that a human being needs to be accepted for what they are. And that's really what the notion of recognition is getting at. See, we need to be accepted for who we are, but then that supposes something else, if we can bring it out, that the people that we work out our identity with matter to us. It's a famous expression, I think, of Mead's significant other, which gets this point across, that there are lots of others in the universe, but some are really important to me, like my parents, for instance, when I'm small. And why are they important to me? Well, it's important that they love me and accept me and really cherish me, right? And that's where the struggle about identity can arise, that it all comes from this, that a human being, a small human being, an infant, a young child, can be accepted as something with certain qualities and so on, but have a sense that they're really something beyond that. They're something a little bit different from that, and have a struggle to find even the words to say this, let alone have it something that is accepted by the caregivers, by the parents. And these two, of course, are linked sometimes.
Okay, so Dr. Taylor gave us a little overview about what we're about to talk about. So I can figure out how to advance this slide here.
I think.
Okay, so Hegel has something called the master-slave dialectic. And that is a part of this recognition theory, which is a huge kind of idea. And so we're about to talk a little bit about that. And again, I have a wonderful video clip that I stumbled across, which actually is really good. So 3 things about the master-slave dialectic that I would like for you to remember are these 3 kind of terms or words. Egocentrism is kind of a stage 1, confrontation, stage 2, and desire for recognition, stage 3. And I promise, or I hope that this will make a little bit more sense in just a second. All right, we've got one more video here. Follow the cursor.
What are you? You're like me, but you aren't me. What are you, an object? An animal? Are you looking at me? Wait, if you're looking at me, then there's a me. I exist, and you exist. But if there's a me, then there's a you. Then that means there is a not me. Something exists that is the negation of myself. An other. Every time I see you, I'm reminded of my negation. And if there's more than one being like me, then at the end of the day, what's left for me to be? I'll kill you! But if I kill you, then you won't be there to look at me. And if you're not there to look at me, how will I know I'm here? I can't kill you, but I can make your life miserable. It's a stalemate. But never forget, I could kill you anytime. From now on, my self-consciousness is rooted in being better than you, being able to destroy you at any moment and replace you with someone who looks identical. You exist to serve me by reinforcing my conception of myself. That's what makes me the master, and you the slave. But wait. I could never get rid of you. You'll always be there, reminding me of my negation with your otherness. Your whole presence is a totalizing violence to me. I need you. I need you to recognize me, but even if you do, I hate you so much your recognition isn't satisfying. My whole identity is built around dominating you. I need you, but you don't need me anymore. Part 2. What the hell was that? Hegel's master and slave dialectic. It's an odd one, to be sure, and there's a good reason why I chose to introduce you to it in the way that I just did. For now, though, let's just make sure we didn't miss anything. Take it as a story featuring two characters, and we'll talk about the meaning in a little bit. In their initial meeting, our two characters, self-consciousnesses, Hegel calls them, are each trying to figure out what they themselves are, what it means to be a self-consciousness. And by discovering somebody else, an other, they find that they gain a new perspective on that question. By discovering an other and seeing themselves through that other's eyes, they discover themselves. Self-consciousness for Hegel isn't an individual achievement, the way that it is for instance, Descartes. Self-consciousness arises through interaction with others, and how we see ourselves is mediated by how those others see us. Self-consciousness exists in itself and for itself, in that and by the fact that it exists for another self-consciousness. That is to say, it is only by being acknowledged or recognized. Each character wants to be recognized by the other, and a life and death struggle ensues, because as we saw, to become aware of the other is to become aware of the possibility of your own negation, and that can be a scary thing. There's this other, it's not bound by my will. It represents the absence of me. Does it mean that I'm disposable if there's just another self-consciousness that's like me out there in the world? I'm gonna kick its ass! In the same way, each must aim at the death of the other. The other's reality is presented to the former as an external other, as outside itself. It must cancel that externality. Or, in other words, fuck me, pal. Fuck you. No. Fuck me. The French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre talked about the nausea of confronting the other. He thought it was shameful and thought one of the worst things that could happen to you was to be fixed by the other's gaze. Particularly if, and we'll be getting into this a little bit later on, they see you as something that you don't see yourself as. Hence his famous quote, "Hell is other people." Of course you want to kill them. Beyond just that though, Hegel thinks that neither self-consciousness can really know what it is until it's risked losing everything, including its life, until it's risked throwing all the contingent stuff away, the clothing, the physical health, the property, all of it. Risk losing all of that until you find the thing that you can't throw away, and whatever that is, that must be what you essentially are. For Hegel, neither self-consciousness can know what it means to be alive until they've faced death. If either one of them really killed the other, then they'd be screwed, because remember, recognition can only arise through being recognized by that other. But during the struggle, one of them values life more than they value being recognized, or they just lose the struggle, they become afraid, and the other becomes the master. They arrive at a conception of themselves as dominant over the slave, the one who experienced that fear, and the slave ends up doing all of their work. But the master is never satisfied. They've reduced the slave so much now that their recognition doesn't cut it for them anymore. What the master really wants is to be recognized by an equal, an independent self-consciousness. They've risked their life and they get the material rewards, but their whole conception of themselves is now bound up in the slave. Meanwhile, the slave is out there in the world, working on stuff, producing things, and as they work, they realize that the things they make reflect them. They understand the world they're building better than the master does. Like, if you want to know about pyramids, you don't ask a pharaoh, you ask the slaves that built them. The slave also confronts death every day, because as a slave they might be killed and replaced at any moment. And they realize that death is the true master. It comes to us all, master or slave. That's a much richer conception of what it is to be a self-consciousness. By working and confronting death, the slave arrives at a conception of themselves as an independent being, not just an extension of the master's will or a piece of property, but a self-consciousness who can say, I built the pyramids, I built the White House, there's a piece of me in this world, I built all of this, not you, I. And if I don't work, all of this stops. In the end, the master isn't the one that wins. The slave learns what it truly means to be an independent self-consciousness. And at that point, it's only a matter of time before they rise up. Part 3.
All right, so that was really long, but I wish I had had that when I was learning about this. Because it was really informative, and I know it was kind of like out there and up in this kind of cloud, but we're going to bring it back down, so don't worry. So one thing I want you to keep in mind is that the master-slave dialectic is a metaphor for institutionalized inequality. So essentially, we're going to go back to the same guy a little bit later in his program, and he's going to explain it a little bit better than I can.
Identity politics. The term identity politics is sometimes used derisively, so I want to make it clear that I'm using it here descriptively only, to mean political engagement that revolves around an appreciation of the fact that people with shared constructed identities will probably have similar experiences and similar political goals as well. If you're gay, and your neighbour is gay, and you live in a country that has a lot of institutional discrimination against gay people, then you have a shared constructed identity, your sexuality, some shared experiences, and probably some similar political goals, namely the transformation or abolition of those discriminatory institutions. Before we go any further, here's an important footnote from Marina Shut Up.
If you're thinking this definition of identity politics describes almost, if not all politics, then you are correct. Arguably, all politics is identity politics, or at least that could be a useful metaphor. If that seems like a problem, just remember that those two neighbors can also have solidarity and share political goals with other people who have different identities as well.
Remember how in the Hegelian dialectic the two sides wanted recognition from each other? Well, identity politics is sometimes called the politics of recognition. Oppressed groups get shown an image of themselves over and over that they just can't identify with, and so they demand recognition. Like the Sartre experience, fixed by the gaze of the hell that is other people. On an individual...
Okay, so we're going to stop there and move on to the next slide because I'm looking at the time. So essentially what he's talking about, this idea that you are shown an image of yourself that you don't recognize is called misrecognition. So misrecognition is the opposite of recognition, essentially. So mutually affirming recognition is the animating struggle of social life and the ultimate aim of any social being. The chance for full recognition is the incentive for us to enter into the social contract. So essentially, we do the work of being citizens of the world because there is a chance that we are recognized fully for who we are. And when that doesn't happen, we feel like, well, there's no reason for me not to loot a Walmart, or there's no reason for me to pay my taxes or do any of the stuff that we just do because we're good citizens, because you are being misrepresented constantly and consistently, or at least that's the argument. So institutional misrecognition is the primary cause of dissatisfaction with the American museum establishment. So essentially, when you are shown an image of yourself in an institution that doesn't seem to fit with who you think you are or who you feel like you are, then you kind of go look to that institution to make changes so that they are reflecting you and the community that you come from. So this is a quote by June Jordan, and it was in 1960. So I'll just read it out for you. So, take me into the museum and show me myself. Show me my people. Show me my soul, America. If you cannot show me myself, if you cannot teach my people what they need to know, and they need to know the truth, and they need to know that nothing is more important than human life. If you cannot show up and teach these things, then why shouldn't I attack the temples of America and blow them up? Essentially, what's going on right now. Okay, so now we're getting into some more really interesting stuff and some images and things like that. So we're going to look at a few of the groups that I've just picked out a few because there have been a lot of institutional protests over the years. We're going to start with the Black Emergency Cultural Coalition, the BECC. We're going to look at the work of artist William Pope L. and also Carrie Mae Weems. And we're going to look at some of the things that they did as either a collective or as an artist to kind of pick apart issues with the American art institution. So let me start with the definition. So we're looking at what is an intervention. An intervention is an action taken to improve the situation. And it is also a term that is applied to artworks. So an art intervention applies to art designed specifically to interact with the existing structure or situation, be it another artwork, the audience, an institution, or in the public domain. So you can have art interventions or just a regular everyday intervention. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later. So I also made a distinction between a protest and an artwork, which is arbitrary but necessary for our purposes here tonight. So we all kind of know that an artwork can be a protest and a protest can be an artwork, but we're going to separate those two just for clarity. So I have kind of made up my own definition. So a museum critical protest is an act or object whose intended outcome or resultant impact is primarily cultural and or institutional change. So we're going to talk a little bit about the art landscape in the 60s, and that'll lead us into a discussion about the Black Emergency Cultural Coalition. So I'm just going to read a little bit about what was going on in the art landscape, especially in New York at this time. So in Mounting Frustration, the art museum in the age of Black Power, Susan E. Cahan begins her introduction by saying, the institutions that make up the art establishment determine who constitutes high art through a process of selective acquisition and display. Until the late 20th century, African Americans were virtually absent from this circuit as cultural producers and cultural consumers. This sad fact remained true until about the late 1960s and 1970s, when major institutions began to contend with Black artists' demand for equity and inclusion. These first efforts by major museums across the United States were not the balm to the race issue that museum leadership hoped, and instead were contested and fraught with issues that sparked debate and protest. So you might be thinking like 1960, late 1960, 1970, all of the things that were going on in the civil rights movement had kind of come to a head and were on their way down the hill at this point. So that just kind of cites how far behind and how resistant to change museums really are and still are. So by the time the civil rights movement had reached the American Art Museum, the movement had passed its peak. The first public demonstrations to integrate museums occurred in late 1968 and early 1969. And that was 20 years after desegregation of the military, 14 years after Brown v. Board of Education, 5 years after the Great March on Washington, 4 years after the Civil Rights Act, and 3 years after the Voting Rights Act. So like you can imagine all of that history passing you by and you're still stuck in the same place. That's got to upset a few people. So move on to the next slide. So the Black Emergency Cultural Coalition, otherwise known as the BECC. So we're going to talk about their protests as intervention and some of the ways that they kind of took the situation in New York especially, but they worked across the country after a while and pressed for change. Okay. So the Black Emergency Cultural Coalition, they were an artist watchdog group, and they were responding to the very real effects of misrepresentation and sustained misrecognition by American institutions. So they were a group of artists led by Benny Andrews, and they were dissatisfied by being interpreted and packaged as a cultural object. They were formed in response to an exhibition called Harlem on My Mind, which was done by the Met in, I believe, '68. And that exhibition, which I will not get into right now because that's a lot, it was essentially a photo montage of the people of Harlem that did not consult the people of Harlem. It did not include a single artwork made by anyone, especially an African-American artist who lived and worked in Harlem at that time. So they kind of staged protests outside of the Met. And then they realized, well, the Met deals with kind of old dead people. But the Whitney, on the other hand, claims to be an American art institution that's contemporary. So let's go stage some protests outside of the Whitney. So they made demands of the Whitney. They staged counter exhibitions. They did a lot of work, and they were kind of like the central force that kind of forced change. And some of the things that came out of their work include demands for representation in the leadership of museums. People like Thelma Golden and Lowry Stokes Sims would not be who they are had it not been for the work of the BECC, because they developed essentially training programs for, well, then minority groups of people to become curators, to become art administrators, to become education specialists. So I have a job because of what these people did. So next, I'm going to actually skip this video. Oh, well, I thought I would. So we're going back. We're going to talk a little bit more about essentially artworks. So we're back to this definition of intervention. I want you to keep this in your head. So an art intervention applies to art designed specifically to interact with an existing structure or situation. Okay, and then now we have protest versus artwork. This is my made up definition of an artwork that helps us clarify the difference just for our purposes here tonight. So please don't think that an artwork can't be a protest or a protest can't be an artwork. That is not true. It just helps to have a differentiating line so that we know what's what. So a museum critical artwork is an act or object whose intended outcome or resultant impact is cultural or institutional critique. So that's really the difference between the two that I am drawing, is that one is action oriented for change, and one can be critique. It can always be both, but for our purposes tonight, we are making a line. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Blackness in the museum. And so producing and reflecting Blackness and Black subjectivity in museum space, whether it's through exhibition or through attempts at inclusion in other ways, has proven difficult. Whether it is a failure in the attempt to reflect Black voices and stories, or a failure to even acknowledge that this work needs to be done, museums have found the presence or absence of the visible Black body, Black culture, and Black voice troubling. So I'm going to read a little bit from a book called Troubling Vision, Performance, Visuality, and Blackness by Nicole Fleetwood. And she contends that seeing Black is always a problem in the visual field that structures the troubling presence of Blackness. As a culture, we want visual and cultural products to solve the problems that they create. But if the Blackness is always already problematic, then relying on visual narratives and realist aesthetics to get at the truth of Blackness and Black experience can never produce the results that we desire. It is nevertheless our expectation that representation will resolve the problem of the visualized Black body. For museums, Blackness is a problem with no simple answer. And many Black artists, creatives, and makers in the visual realm explore the productive possibilities of this problem. So that'll make a little bit more sense in just a second. So our first artist that we're going to take a look at is William Pope L. He is best known for his crawls, which he does all over the place. And essentially they are what they're called. He crawls. He started this practice, I believe, in 1990. And he was it was 91 actually. And he was doing a residency, and there was something going on in Tompkins Square Park. And he started doing this thing, which became his thing. So I will show you a little clip of him talking about his own work.
Is it really true that there's spirits in there?
And mind you, this is not at a museum, this first crawl, but he has done this in protest.
I remember it was one of those things that started out fairly innocently, but just got out of hand. A protest here that turned into a riot, and they closed the park. It really changed the neighborhood. I thought it would be an interesting site to do a work that didn't require language, it just required an action. A simple action, and that was simply to crawl. I'd been writing a lot. I mean, that's all I did. I was sort of getting written out, and I needed to find a more direct way of making things happen culturally. It's kind of uplifting, crawling. If you've never tried it, you should. I was out here, and I was basically along this. The landscape, of course, was a bit more empty at that time. You know, at pretty much the run of the place, as it were. When you're crawling on the street, you discover all kinds of things, you know, insect life, sometimes dead matter, piles of larvae, or it's amazing the kind of things you find if you're that far from it. It was a performance, so you know, when you do a performance, you have to have some surface that tells people who you are. So I had to figure out, like, who was I? And I realized I was going to work. Yes, I was. The suit I was wearing, it was wool, and it was very warm. It must have been like 98. I decided I need company, so I bought this dandelion, and I said, okay, my goal is to protect this flower. Eventually I met this man. He sees this guy crawling.
So we'll stop there. But essentially, the park, Tompkins Square Park, had been a site of ongoing kind of riots, and there was homelessness, and so they kind of closed it down. So at the time of Pope L's crawl, Tompkins Square Park was barricaded for renovations, and by assuming a prostrate posture, he forced onlookers to direct their gazes downward, and he aimed to make visible historically disenfranchised bodies and displaced communities. So one thing that was really interesting about that video was his the statement about looking for a simple action. So I wanted you guys to keep that in your mind. A simple action that can produce big change. So now we're going to talk a little bit about Carrie Mae Weems. And of course, I'm going really fast because these artists are amazing. And if you don't know them, I highly suggest you look them up and look at their bodies of work because they're incredible. I had the privilege to work with Carrie Mae on a project, and she is an amazing woman and one of my favorite people. So essentially, we're going to talk a little bit about her museum series, which she's been doing since I believe 2006. And so what she does, and this is something that is part of her practice generally, is that she inserts her body, so that is Carrie May, into contested sites. And she essentially speaks her own presence into places where essentially she doesn't belong. So her museum series, she stands outside of museums. She has done this with plantations and other kinds of contested sites of violence against Black bodies and things like that. So this is, I believe this is the Philadelphia Museum, and she is facing off with not just the building, but the history of exclusion and marginalization and misrecognition. And this is complicated by her position as an artist, because I bet you money that she has worked in that museum. So she is a kind of one of the privileged few, a woman, an African-American, and she's been accepted by the art establishment. But her act kind of mirrors and reflects the protests and actions of the BECC, because those were also artists who had been, some of them had been accepted into the art establishment, and they were kind of kicking in the door for the people coming up behind them. So I will have Carrie May talk to you in her own words.
There's a part of me that wishes that I were 20 years old now. You know, that I know that I'm just missing a great shift and a great turn in the possible. There's this kind of upheaval that's happening, and that's happening across the board. And I think that one of the great places to look for the ways in which we manage it are through the visual arts. It occurred to me at a certain point that I've always been interested in questions of power. What is it? Who controls what? How? Under what circumstances? Who lacks it? Who has it? I think I've really spent my life really examining ideas about power, and probably because, for the most part, I didn't think I had any. And to then figure out what it means to be empowered, and how to empower and how to impact through not only the work that I make, but the work that I care about. I think that we've sort of, come to this rather extraordinary moment. We really are up against these profound changes in what we've come to know. So there's a lot of clamor right now, and there's a kind of shift that's been going on, so that we see a kind of emergence and revival of women and African American participants in a way that we did not see them before. Or for that matter, not just African Americans, but brown people more generally are being asked to participate within the field. And that's important, because once you're at the table, something else happens, something else shifts, something else becomes more possible, something else becomes more dynamic, more meaningful, more engaging for the entire mix of people. I can see the doors swinging open, and they won't close for a really long time. This is really, really an exciting period. So for me, even within the despair, there is always incredible hope. I'm, 65 years old now. So, maybe if I'm lucky, I got like another 20, 25 years on the planet, and then that's it for me, right? I'm out. But I'm always aware of the people that widened the path for me so that I could work a little easier. Artists that did not receive the same kind of attention that I've received. And now I have to use my skin and my body to push for an even wider path, so that another group of young artists who are coming behind me can work and live and be and produce more easily than ever before. And hopefully they will do that for the next generation that's coming behind them. I think that that's what it is.
Okay, so I'm actually gonna skip this part. But so essentially, Carrie May has issued a challenge to everybody, artist or not artist, to use what you've got essentially to make the world a better place. So I think that I don't know that I can say it any better than that. So I'll just end with a question. What tools do you have that can be used for transformation? So if you think about crawling, if you think about standing, if you think about laying down, what can you do with your body, with your talents, with your gifts that can be used to help someone else? And with that, I am done. If anybody has any questions, I would love to answer them. Other than that, I will stop sharing my screen and I would love to see you guys. Any questions at all? Feel free to unmute yourselves and let me know you're here. Hello.
Hello.
Hey.
Hello.
So
I don't think we have any questions, but that was so informative. Is there some place we could go to find out, like, do you have, I'm sure you must have like a website somewhere we can keep learning more of this information?
Yeah, so I actually didn't show it. I have a bibliography of sources, essentially some of the stuff that I read from or talked about. So I can definitely share that with you guys. And there, I mean, I feel like it's really like what Carrie May was saying, and that was done, I believe, in 2018. It's really the time for people to make their own decisions about how they're going to be active and how they're going to activate spaces and activate change. And it's all up for grabs. Like, you can do anything. If Pope L can crawl for 20, 30 years, essentially any action that you decide is important can be used to change any situation. So I don't know that there's a resource for that.
That's fair. Thank you so much, by the way.
You are welcome. Oh, I see my dad up there. I'm sure he's going to ask me something crazy.
No, nothing crazy today.
Everyone, this is Fred Falker. This is my father. He is one of the smartest people that I know. And then that's my mother up there in the doctor outfit. And she's the other smartest person that I know. So with that, I guess I am finished. If anybody has any other questions, I'll hang around. But I know that we are pretty much out of time. So I appreciate everybody being here tonight. I appreciate the Windsor Library for inviting me. And so with that, I will turn it over.
So I can say one thing before I get off.
Yeah.
That artwork on that back wall, some of that is Erin's and her sisters from about a long time ago.
Thank you.
Is it possible we can get a close-up on some of that artwork?
I can't move my camera that far, so I could send Erin some pictures of it. So, but yeah, some of that's her sisters and some of it's hers. And
oh, the good stuff is my sisters.
No. What are the mediums back there?
That's like we have finger paint,
that's right.
crayon, a little bit of everything. So he's got stuff from when I was 3 years old in that.
That's right.
I mean, those are some early shows. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
She's got
my first
new
gallery.
Yeah, she's got new stuff, but I just can't take that down. So when I do a lot of Zoom calls, people always want to know where it comes from. I said, well, my daughter is sort of an artist person, but I don't show that new stuff. I don't show that.
The best way to be described, sort of an artist person.
Yeah.
I love
From
it.
a non-artist.
Well, thank you, Erin. I think I speak for all of us to say that we are thrilled that you were able to fit us in and make us a part of your evening tonight. I, for one, when I was able to get back to my desk, went sort of down a rabbit hole of Carrie Mae Weems' The Kitchen Table series. So that's where I'm going to spend the rest of my evening when I get home.
That's a good place.
Oh, it's so good. So yeah, thank you everyone, like I said, for joining us. A recording of this entire event will be available through the library's YouTube page in the next couple of days. If there's nothing else, thank you all for being here tonight. And I hope you have a lovely evening.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.